Alright, some apologies if I'm meandering a little bit because I do want to get to Rey in more substance, but I want to finish up part 1 with Mauler because some of the things reviewing part 1 again is like, they were just so horrific that I have to address them before we move on to part 2 and 3 that we get the quote-unquote the meat with Rey and Kylo, because I do find that fascinating. So let me just go through really quick the fuel thing again. He says, and this is a direct quote, "Since when is fuel an issue in Star Wars? Not that it can't be, but they pulled this out of nowhere. No. Phantom Menace, fuel is a thing. It's a plot line that is necessary for Qui-Gon Jinn to find Anakin. Fuel has been brought up plenty of times. Star Wars 1977, Empire Strikes Back. It's also in, in Revenge of the Sith. So it is a thing. Refueling, fueling, it's not a minor plot point. It is sometimes a major plot point. But a lot of people keep saying this. So no, fuel is a thing in Star Wars. Rian did not invent fuel in Star Wars. Repeat after me, okay? Let me get on to more substantive things, but I want to go through this because this ties into his lack of knowledge of the Sith and the Force and everything else. And I'm going to do a whole section on Leia and the whole space controversy, but let me go through that very quickly because it ties into Rey because of, his whole obsession that Force users need training, allegedly, and, it's just like, okay, is there really an argument here? I don't know. He thinks there is. So let's go through it. So, as we all know, if you've seen the film, there's this controversial moment where she's blown into space, right? Kylo doesn't shoot her, but the other fighters do, so Leia is thrown into space, but she lives. And people are like, what? How is this possible? How did she get training in the Force? Yada, 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 yada. But if you actually look, first, in terms of canon, this has happened. For instance, Kanan was thrown out by Darth Maul in the animated series, and he survives. He just uses his Force powers to get back in, but he survives in space. Also, logically, and as a matter of scientific fact, you are not dead if you are in space. You do have some time to breathe in space. There's a lot of differing accounts how long you have, whether it's 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, or a minute, but you can survive in space. You also don't freeze instantaneously in space. Space does not just freeze you to death. So, a lot of what he brings up makes no sense at all. But he's being very generous. He said, let's assume, this is a direct quote again, let's assume she does have the power and the training required. Now, this is his method in a nutshell. So he's like, I'm going to be very generous and assume, okay, maybe Leia has Force abilities, even though we don't know this, which is not also a complete lie, by the way, but okay, he doesn't know Star Wars. I think I've shown that in like 5 videos already, but I can keep proving he doesn't know anything about Star Wars. But okay, but he's being very generous, like, oh, Leia could do this if she had the training. Wait a minute. Your generosity is basically poison goods. Like, why do you think she needs training to do what she did? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But let me add a thing that will tie in directly to Rey, because he says, because he's not completely stupid, so he knows this. So like, this is like, quote unquote, direct quote again, all we have to go on is Luke saying Leia has power in episode 6. Again, like the fuel thing, no. At the end of Empire Strikes Back, Leia senses Luke. She already has her Force power. She's using her Force power. This is even in the original film because Vader has a tough time probing her mind. So we can assume, yes, she had the Force from the first film. She has the Force powers in Empire Strikes Back. And there's 3 years separating Empire to Return of the Jedi. So once again, you're a complete fucking moron. You didn't pay attention. So no. Episode 6 is not the first time she's known to have Force powers. Now, what you've pointed out is there's a plot hole because the dialogue does not make sense. Why is Luke saying this? He should know she has Force powers. But here's the problem. That's a plot hole that is Lucas's fault. That is not Rian Johnson's fault, you moron. You're actually refuting your own point. You've refuted your own video because you're trying to use the OT against Rian, but you've just shown the OT itself has major plot holes. So, stupid, you just proved everything your critics are saying about you. You don't know what you're talking about. You're nitpicking, and even when you nitpick, the nitpicks make no sense whatsoever. So you don't know how space works. You don't know how oxygen works. You don't know how physics works. You don't know how bombers work. And now we're going to show, once again, you don't have the Force or the Sith work. So let's get on to Rey and Luke and their training. And again, let me be very clear. I'm not trying to do ad hominem because in this section, he's actually half and half. He does sort of say, okay, fine. Like, because Luke makes fun of her. When they do their training, he's not like, oh my god, you're a beautiful feminist goddess. Oh my god, you're Daisy Ridley. He doesn't do that. He's very dismissive of her. And his actual lessons are, He doesn't care about her. He's very snide and snarky to her. So at least the tonality is not, quote, Mary Sue. So he doesn't have anything logically there. So he has to fall back on, you guessed it, subjectivity. Because what does he say? He doesn't say anything logically is amiss here, right? Because he says, like, okay, this is true. This is what I want. Rey is being humbled. However, he says there's a problem with tone and consistent flow. And this is at 104.16 to 104.37. At least the way I have timestamped for him. So tonally, it's what is his issues, because what he finds is again and again that Ryan is mixing humor with seriousness, right? So, for instance, Rey talks to Kylo. Rey is angry, but in the background we see the nuns and they're making weird noises. And he says, well, there we go. See, this is the problem. The problem is not plot hole. Now, of course, in the video, that is the whole issue, right? At least rhetorically, he says, the problem is there are so many plot holes, this is incompetent. Well, plot holes are objective. So, okay, if you prove that point, then I definitely have a challenge. If, however, there are no major plot holes, and believe me, there aren't any, you really are making things up. I can only cite 3 plot holes, and I'm being very generous. I don't think those are enough to prove your point. But plot holes we can argue about rationally. Tone is something that's by definition subjective. What you think is tonally off will not be tonally off for somebody else. So, yeah, he's introduced radically a subjective standard and just passes it by. He doesn't care. He's like, okay, yeah, it's subjective. The jokes didn't work for me. There we go. But how is that a universal objective standard? He doesn't care. He's like, okay, fine, fine. But what's interesting is he doesn't actually mind the logic of the argument. But again, he's going to bring some issues to bear. And I don't want to be seen like I'm mean or evil, but what he brings up is so laughable that it's so... And it's literally in his video, his own cutting refutes him. But let me set this up, because he asks, like, Luke has this thing where he says, you know, I've seen this raw strength only once before. He's talking to Rey. It didn't scare me enough then. It does now. And he's like, and this is Mauler, is he saying Rey and Ben have more power than Vader now? Okay, 2 problems with it. First of all, Vader is not the most powerful Force user. I know a lot of fans who don't study this stuff think Vader is insanely powerful. No, there's a lot of Force users way more powerful than Vader. We've even seen it already. Snoke clearly has more power. Technically, Yoda has more power. Plagueis, if he's still alive, has more power. He achieved immortality. Palpatine probably has more power. Ancient Sith and Ancient Jedi have way more power. We have, from the canon, stories of people having way more power than Vader. So, right away, you're an idiot. Like, I understand you may be a Vader fanboy, but Vader does not have so much power. If you've seen only the films, you might think this, but if you know the universe, no, Vader by far is not the most powerful Force user. That's a popular misconception, but then you're again showing that you seem to know the films a little bit, and that's it. You don't really seem to understand Star Wars, the mythology, the lore, the production history, etc., etc. But let me get on to this other one where he makes this weird statement saying that, quote, the Jedi are the opposing force to the Sith. 105. No, that's another popular misconception. Lucas has said this in numerous quotes. The Sith are not all evil. The Jedi are not all good. Everybody has good and evil within them. The Sith and Jedi are just metaphors. He is not accepting a binary of good and evil. He's saying that everything has good and evil. Even, like, Palpatine is good. I mean, he stops the war. He creates the war, but it doesn't serve a purpose anymore, so he stops it. So he already saves millions of people. He doesn't care about those people. He's just saying that, for me, functionally, we don't need a war anymore. So the Sith are themselves not evil for the sake of evil. They just have an opposing agenda. Also, he doesn't seem to realize that the Sith and Jedi in the ancient times were allies. They were not opposing forces. They actually were together at one point in time. So he doesn't even seem to know the basic history of the Force. Like, he's like, okay. But now let me get to the killer argument, which is so bad. It is so stupid. It's like what he just criticized Ryan for. Like, the tonal shift is ridiculous and doesn't make any sense. But here, it is a logical problem because of the way he does his own editing of his own video. So what does he do? He says, well, okay, fine. He concedes with the prequels. Yes, the Jedi are not all good all the time. They have made, you know, errors, right? So he's not a complete idiot. But now he makes this weird argument, which is, I have a hard time not laughing because it is so bad. It is so stupid. And here it is. But here's the thing, direct quote. Okay, the Jedi are not good, but here, quote unquote, direct quote. Quote, they have a tendency to fight the Sith. Okay, End quote. They have a tendency to fight the Sith. Now, let's be very clear. Like, he could be cute and say, well, I didn't say the Jedi fight the Sith all the time, or that they necessarily fight the Sith in every instance. Okay, that's very clever, but clearly we know what you're saying. You're saying, and you just said it. You said the Jedi and Sith are opposing. So, yeah, logically you are saying, if you're a Jedi, you have a strong tendency to fight the Sith. And I am not joking. I am not joking. You can look at the video yourself. He says this in his own video. He cuts to Count Dooku. Now, this is more Lucas's mistake and not his, but Dooku is not a Sith. Even though he's being called a Sith Lord, he has the title, you know, Darth Tyrannus. Dooku is not a Sith. Dooku is just a dark Jedi. He's a Jedi using dark force powers, dark side powers. So, basically, your own editing of your own video refutes your argument, because you're saying, see, the Jedi have a tendency to fight the Sith. Now, let me cut to a Jedi who has allied himself with the Sith. That's right, the Jedi fight the Sith, and as my example, I'm going to show you a Jedi who is working with the Sith, because Dooku works with Sidious. So you're like, your own video refutes what you're just saying in your own voiceover narration. So I'm like, is he being serious? Either he honestly thinks Dooku is a Sith, and maybe he's being ironic and being comedic, or he doesn't know anything. He honestly thinks Force users by definition are either Jedi or Sith, logically. No, you can be a Force user and not be a Jedi or a Sith. That's always been logically possible. Like, this is not even a controversial issue. This is a very basic statement about the Star Wars universe. Thus, Snoke is not a Sith. Kylo is not a Sith. You can be a Force user and not be a Sith. And your example of the Jedi fighting the Sith is Dooku, who worked with the Sith? Like, I keep thinking, like, and he doesn't just do this once. He does this quite a few times where, like, wait a minute, your visual image actually makes the complete opposite point you're trying to make. So it makes you look like a complete moron. Like, you don't know at all what you're talking about. Like, you don't know Empire Strikes Back. You don't know Return of the Jedi. You don't know the prequels. You don't know Last Jedi. Like, your level of knowledge is so high. I'm like wondering, is this like you're trolling your own audience, or are you really this stupid? And I have to conclude, yes, Mauler, British commentator of Star Wars, you are many things. You are a Star Wars fan. You've seen the films. You don't know Star Wars. Your expertise level is so low that almost every criticism you have is based on such a huge amount of ignorance of everything. Fuel, Sith powers, Jedi lore. You go through the list. It's like, I'm just noting stuff you get wrong all the time. It's like, I'd really like to know if some of his fans can present me with a really strong argument, because so far, I haven't found it. But we're going to get to it, because the Holdo plot is probably the weakest, and the latest stuff is tricky, but yeah, the first part is pretty disappointing. It's a lot of things. He just invents stuff and his own editing refutes them. So, we've closed out part 1. I'll go back to it, but yeah, just going through a quick run through of Rey, the Fuel, and Leia. He doesn't know what he's saying. So, very disappointing. Star Wars Analyzed, closing off part 1 of Mauler's so-called critique of Last Jedi. Star Wars Analyzed, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. Please hit the like button below, and thank you very much. Star Wars Analyzed on Mauler's supposed critique of himself.